This conference will now be recorded.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Technology Review Council session. And my name is Nova Omana, and I'm very, very pleased today to have Don Everett with us. I've spoken to Don a number of times, and I find him to be a very accomplished speaker, a great presenter, and he has some pretty good jokes once in a while here and there. So he'll keep us alive out here. But we're here to talk about emotional intelligence and a whole bunch of other perspectives. As you can see our slide here that says, "Someone moved my cheese again." If you've not read, the cheese book, which I think everybody's kind of required reading, I think you're going to find that Don's got some very good, interesting perspectives. As always, I would encourage you as an audience to, shall we say, raise your hand, put a question in the chat, let me know that you've got to ask something of Don, and we'll be happy to do that. And Don, I'm going to not do justice to your introduction, so I'll ask you to please introduce yourself and then take it away. So it's yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so my name is Don Everett. I started Workforce Interactive about 16 years ago. My background in terms of education was originally in computer science. So I'm a computer major and spent, probably half my career, if not more, working for some of the big software companies that you guys, I'm sure, have heard of, like Oracle and companies like that. And so I've done a lot of work more in the software programming, the analysis, implementations, and you name it. I've done about everything you can do in a software company. And then I had an opportunity to apply my technical background, my political background, with some data that pertains to the HR community. And so I saw something that really excited me about human capital analysis. And so I started my company 16 years ago. And what I want to talk to you about today is involves, how we can really kind of learn a little bit more about what emotional intelligence is, how we can get our arms around it, and how we can actually leverage the insight that it provides us if we can get our arms around it. In other words, if we can really understand EQ, emotional intelligence, what do we do with it? What can we do with it? What's out there for us to leverage to make ourselves more effective in roles as leaders or managers in our respective organizations in a variety of different ways. So that's what I had planned for you today. I chose this title because Dr. Johnson, who has since passed, sold over 20 million copies. So, there's a good percentage, or there's a good chance that many of us on the call today have read the book. And it was a fairly short read. Many of you who read it know. But it was kind of interesting to me because I think Dr. Johnson was really ahead of his time. And I'm going to actually kind of add some things to his presentation or connect some dots that at that time he might not have realized how far ahead of his time he was. And so I hope I can make something that might seem like we're retracing a subject, but I think I can add some things to it that make it just as refreshing and interesting as it was the first time around. So one of the main topics in Dr. Johnson's book was that adaptability is a very, very, it's a competency that is very often not possessed by a majority of people, and it's also one of the most important competencies to be successful in not only business but in life. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what that is, or what's behind that. So let me give you an example. The example I like to use, because most of us can relate to it, is when we go to a shopping center that has, a retail store or a grocery store, and we purchase things, be it, groceries or merchandise, and we go out in the parking lot and we load those items into our car. Well, we have an option. We can return our cart to a cart return station that has been intentionally placed out there in various portions or places in the parking lot. We can return our cart to the store. We can leave our cart in the parking lot somewhere. We can maybe push it over to a curb and rest it up on top of a curb so it's immobilized. So we have options. And let me give you, I'd like to focus on the example of a person returning their cart to the cart return station. So think of a person, it might even be you, who returns their cart to the cart return station consistently. Even you might even say, all the time, without any deviation. And why is it that somebody would do that? Well, they're not going to get arrested if they don't do it. The store is not going to prohibit them from shopping if they see them not return their cart to the cart return station. So why is it that people actually have some consistency or some habits or some ideals or some perspectives, viewpoints, habits that they consistently adhere to or execute? Why is that? And I think it's a great, kind of starting point for where we're going to go today. And it also connects the dots between Dr. Johnson's book and where we're going to take it, because there's a reason why people have habits established or ideals that they've established in their mind about doing things like this with consistency. And at a high level, it is because of emotional intelligence. So technically speaking, emotional intelligence is managing our physiological, changes, our emotions in a way that they don't disrupt our ability to be thoughtful and exercise good judgment under duress. And by the way, for those of you who haven't had a chance to read as much as I have or to practice in an emotional intelligence arena, it's referred to as EQ, not EI, primarily because the folks that make up the emotional intelligence community wanted to maintain parity with IQ. So because this standard was established that it would be referred to as intelligence quotient, they wanted to remain consistent. So you'll often hear the emotional intelligence referred to as EQ. I just wanted to explain that. So tying back to my example that we just covered, think of a person who happens to believe that everyone in their community should return their cart to the cart return station. And that is one of their personal values and principles or tenets. And they happen to believe that you're not a good citizen of the community, if you do not do that. And so they could pass judgment on somebody that they saw in the parking lot not return their cart to the cart return station. One of their ideals has been violated or ignored or neglected. And that is something that could absolutely happen. But let me give you an example where we could have good EQ or poor EQ exercised there. Well, there could be good EQ if I didn't prematurely render a judgment on that person simply because of my personal ideals. The person might have a family emergency. They might have a business meeting that they've got to get back to, and they don't want to speed and violate the speeding limits that might be in place on the highway. There could be practical reasons for why that person did not return their car to the cart return station. So if I were to prejudge the kind of person that individual is, I might be exercising poor EQ. Whereas if I'm exercising good EQ, I might make sure that I'm not letting my personal opinions get in the way of a decision that I could later regret. So I just want to establish that if we're exercising good emotional intelligence, we're really making sure that we're not letting our emotional instincts run over some of the other thinking elements or decision factors that we should include before we render a decision or a judgment. So, okay, so how do we get our arms around this? So if that's what emotional intelligence is, how do we really get a feel for what's going on here? How do we really know where we are? What's the baseline? And it's interesting because a lot of people, when you talk to them about emotional intelligence, it's very often something that is related to meditation. And what I mean by that is that although they are related in more of a, one can help the other, the reason I say that is because very often people know that meditation is good for you. However, they don't really know how to do it or what it is. They just know that it's good for you. And I liken that to emotional intelligence. Most people, whether they haven't or have read books about EQ, or whether they have or haven't been to a seminar on it, most people will acknowledge that there's so much evidence, there's so many studies that have been performed. They acknowledge that good emotional intelligence is much better to have than poor emotional intelligence. But they still don't really understand fully what is it? What does it actually, what does it mean? When do I know I have it? When do I not have it? How do I get it? Those kinds of questions. So I want to start to kind of pull the veil, off of that and reveal a little bit more information about how we can really understand where we are with a person's EQ. So as I understand it, and until somebody can prove me wrong, Dr. Robert Hartman remains the only behavioral instrument author who was nominated for a Nobel Prize. And there's a couple things that are remarkable about what Hartman did that I want to point out at this point in the presentation. One is that his discoveries in this area about measuring emotional intelligence were so remarkable that it led it to literally a new social science being established. So most of us are familiar with social sciences like sociology, psychology, economics, anthropology, the social sciences. When you get into Dr. Hartman's work, it literally led to a new social science being established, namely axiology, which the word axios in Greek is to value. So you'll see it more commonly referred to as value science. So if you think about how remarkable that is, that the doctor's work led to a new science being established, there's a couple other things I want to point out about his work. One, it's the only social science that has a direct one-to-one relationship with mathematics. It was deductively reasoned using transinfinite calculus. And the other thing is that he proved that we all factor or filter our decision-making process with 3 dimensions of value. And I want to talk to you about those as well right now. So Hartman proved that we have 3 ways of considering things. It's almost like our CPU has 3 filters. It will value the uniqueness of something, and we refer to that as heart thinking. And that is unique thinking. You'll hear the scientific term often used, intrinsic thinking. And that's the kind of thinking that goes on when we are really assigning a great deal of value to the intrinsic, unique qualities of something. So that's why a set of tableware would be more valuable to you because it was passed down from 3 generations in your family rather than some set of tableware you just bought at a store. It's got intrinsic value that's infinite in value. So that's heart thinking. And Dr. Hartman proved that was one of the 3 dimensions of value that we factor when we assign value to something. The other one I'd like to talk about is practical thinking, which is comparative thinking, relative thinking. And this is when we actually are comparing the properties and characteristics between more than one option and physically sensing which is better, best, faster, more efficient, so on and so forth. So this would be determining which is the best vendor to proceed with on a given project at our company. And we might factor the cost of the vendor's solution. We might factor the level of support. We might factor what things have been said on about them on various review sites. We might factor referrals that they provided about current customers. We might factor the size of their organization. So we would be literally comparing more than one alternative to another and using practical thinking to make our decision or to sway our decision. And then I had reserved the most common for the last filter, and that last filter is what we call should thinking. And it is, by the way, the practical thinking is referred to as extrinsic. So we have intrinsic, extrinsic, and then we have systemic. You've probably heard the term systemic thinking. Should thinking is a term we like to use. It's the way people think things should be. And this is the most dominant thinking. It's not even close. This is why the book from Dr. Johnson resonated with so many people. Because in my studies, we've tested about 750,000 people, and it breaks down roughly 80% of the population is going to be dominated by should thinking. And I don't mean that to be necessarily good or bad in and of itself. I'm just here to tell you that, and this is why Dr. Johnson's book did, kind of had the success it enjoyed, because people related to it, because most people are going to be inclined to be led by should thinking, which means that they're more likely to follow ideals, viewpoints, opinions, habits, routines that they have become accustomed to because they advocate for them, they've been trained on them, they've been doing it this way for 30 years, that kind of thing. Those kinds of things are examples of should thinking. So these three types of thinking really do reveal quite a bit about an individual's EQ, because I have different dial settings that I can have on these three settings. All of us do, based on our life experiences. How do we have these things formed? Well, a lot of it has to do with the way we were raised, the level of stress we were under in our formative years, the friends we hung out with, the schools we went to, the life experiences. Let me give you an example. My deceased mother-in-law lost her mother and her sister to a drunk driver. So do you think she would have a stronger viewpoint about how drunk drivers should be punished than the average person? It would be entirely reasonable to assume so. So our life experiences, everything that goes into where we are at any given point in our life kind of shapes our settings on where we have these three filters, these three dimensions of value. So I wanted to kind of level set there and then show you where we can go from here now that we know what we're dealing with. So all of us enter the game with these three dimensions of value. We also refer to as dimensions of thought. We all have these three dials, but we are all going to have our own little settings, which makes us a kind of a unique human being based on our unique life experiences. Now, let me give you an example. I wanted to give you an example, and I think, I was told that the group is going to be a little bit more technically inclined or more experienced with technical projects. So I just threw one together that I thought is my humble attempt. And I wanted to use the .NET thing. And so let me start with should. And by the way, you'll notice there's the reason I made the should area bigger in the previous slide as well as here. It's because it's dominant. This is what you're dealing with. You got to remember that 80% of the workforces where you guys work are going to be dominated by should thinking. So almost 4 out of 5 people you meet are going to have a strong predisposition to follow their opinions, their ideals, their viewpoints, their perspectives. So let me give you an example. .NET, if we were to say to each other, how might we know .NET? Well, if we've never worked with it, and you have to assume that for my should example, if we've never worked with .NET, then the only way we would know about .NET is what we read about it, or what we discussed with somebody who had worked with .NET, or what I researched on the internet about it, or maybe I talked to somebody on the phone at another company that had managed the .NET project. But at the bottom line, in other words, is that my only knowledge about .NET would be the way I think it should be, based on concepts, ideas, facts, anecdotal evidence that I have collected. But I've really never rolled up my sleeves and worked with it in my hypothetical. All I know is that the way it should be, based on, again, my research. Now, when I move into the practical realm, that implies that I've actually used my senses, I've got in, rolled up my sleeves, and I've worked. And so you see in the practical realm how I might know .NET would be different. Hey, I've actually built a .NET app and experienced real tangible properties of its tools and libraries. I can now make a practical comparison for a project between .NET and Java, as an example. And so practical involves comparisons. I'm no longer in a should realm. I've actually done a project in .NET. I have experience. I can draw on my experience. I'm no longer in a should realm. I'm in a practical realm. And then the heart example I decided to put together for you guys was, it might mean a person that values heart thinking might have a special affinity to .NET because, oh my gosh, that was the first development platform that I learned out of college, or that I used on my first initial commercial project. It'll always have a special meaning to me because that was my first one, my first programming project, my first application that I delivered to the marketplace. So, or the .NET class is where I met my wife, my future wife. I mean, all these things would be examples of thinking with my heart. So I wanted to give you three perspectives about how somebody's .NET perspective can change based on which of these three filters they value more than the other. Okay. Now, the dial settings that we have in these three settings, they determine our emotional intelligence. Okay, let me say that again. These dial settings, whether I'm really attentive to should and kind of attentive to practical and a little bit more attentive to heart, that setting, the relationship of that attentiveness to these three dimensions of value, they determine my emotional intelligence because they are revealing my bias, my thinking bias. I don't mean bias like whether or not, I root for the Giants or the Dodgers. I mean my bias between thinking orientations. Do I prefer to work alone or do I prefer to work with others? As an example, do I prefer to work in a position where I will be the one getting the most attention, or do I prefer to work in an environment where I don't have attention drawn to me? As an example. So they reveal our biases and they reveal the intensity of our biases. In other words, I can have a strongly opinionated person and a mildly opinionated person, as an example. So these value settings, the amount of attention, the amount of value, remember it's value science, the amount of value I assign to these three dimensions of value, they reveal how I'm likely to act under duress. And the more that the duress level, the more that the stress level rises, the more likely I am to lean into my predisposed EQ settings. Okay. So
Don, I'm sorry. This is Nov. I have a very quick question then,
yeah,
and that I'm tracking to this. I love it. I'm really loving what you're talking through. So I'm curious. I suspect that these settings are potentially maybe a work setting for this kind of predisposition of thinking. Maybe there's a home setting where I'm more relaxed, maybe more comfortable, know the people a lot better, whatever the case may be. Is there that different settings for different environments or different situations? Or
yeah,
both?
it's a great question, and yeah, the answer is yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, it's a great question, and I wanted to be real careful. I didn't potentially bore people to death, but there's actually 4 levels of we call 4 conditions of thinking. Level 1 would be when you're under, the least amount of duress. You're alone, you're home, you're reading your favorite novel, you have an iced tea, you're really under no stress. Well, then your settings are going to be almost perfectly balanced. There's no duress. Level 2, you're getting into an environment now where you might have a little bit more pressure. Maybe you're at a restaurant and you're with some friends and the waiter says, yes, what are you going to order today? Oh my God, I'm with friends and they've already ordered. They ordered quickly. I don't know what I want. I mean, so you raise the stress levels up, and then the settings start to show a little bit more separation. And then condition 3 is when we're under what we've associated in our studies with what you find in 95% of the decisions made in a workplace environment. You're under duress. I've got deadlines. Boy, I've got a project that has to be delivered under budget, and I've got a big meeting with a department I'm not familiar with, and I've got an employee review with somebody I'm not really seeing eye to eye with. So all that stuff that goes on in a work environment, we found that it accounts for about 95% of the decisions we make will be in that condition 3, which is what the settings are intended to reveal. Condition 4, which I hope none of you have to experience, would be that hair on fire level of duress. And that's when you're more likely to not just have really knee-jerk emotional reactions. So it's a great question. Yeah, it has to do with the level of duress, the atmospheric pressure. Okay. And when you're home, yeah, when you're now, don't get me wrong, there's some home settings where you can have a lot of pressure too, right?
Yes. So to your point, it's the situation and it's not the environment necessarily.
Absolutely, because God forbid, but somebody could have an abusive home environment, so there could also be just as much stress in a home setting. But yeah, absolutely, good question. So now that we kind of have a level set, we know where we are now. We know that, hey, if I can get my arms around these 3 settings, I kind of know where I'm at with a person. Well, well, what can I do? Well, gee, if we can know where we're at, because let's face it, if we can't measure, you can't do anything. If you don't know where you are, how do you know where you're going, or where to go from there? You don't know where you're starting from. So how do we measure emotional intelligence? Because if we can really measure this and know with pinpoint accuracy where we need to develop, how we need to develop it, then we really might have something that could separate our organization from all the others in our space. So I wanted to start with the ways, the traditional ways. And the traditional ways are what us, the organizations like mine, in our trade, in our craft, we refer to as self-analysis. And all I mean by that is, I'm referring to 99% of the instruments out there. So I know with this audience being HR related, I'm sure most of you have seen them all or taken them all or know people that have seen most of the tests out there. But Myers-Briggs and DISC and the ones that have been around, my goodness, Myers-Briggs is 100 years old now. But when we say self-analysis, what we mean is that you read the test questions or whatever they're asking you to do, and it's intuitively obvious what they're asking. I can read this and I know, yeah, I see what you guys are doing. You're trying to get me to weigh in on my stance on drugs in the workplace. But I know what you're asking. And so the examinee, you have to trust that the examinee will answer in a straightforward fashion without any subjectivity. So in other words, well, gee, I want to answer in the way the Tech Review Council wants me to answer instead of how I really might answer. So there's risk that could occur. And it's the same thing with, I'm showing you here, I've got arguably the most popular in terms of the ones you most likely would have taken in your careers. I have DISC, I have Myers-Briggs, I have PI, I have Gallup. I've got them all, but you can see if you read them all, they're all self-analysis. Every one of them I can see, yeah, I know what you're asking me. It's intuitively obvious what you're asking me. And folks, that's why these tests make you feel like you're being asked the same thing 7 times. They are doing that on purpose because they're concerned about the subjectivity. I don't know, gamesmanship may be a little bit strong a term, but certainly the manipulation or the subjective factoring that can occur when a person responds. Are they really responding in a way that they think they need to respond in order to get the job, to get the promotion, or is that really them? And so you have an element of subjectivity. That has been in place for, like I said, for going on 100 years with Myers-Briggs. My extreme interest in working with your group is that usually, folks that are involved in some capacity with a technology bend are going to be more of an innovative organization or work in an innovative capacity. And so I want to show you kind of an alternative way, more innovative way, because the traditional way is vulnerable to subjectivity. And let me give an example. If we had administered this traditional self-reporting instrument to Bernie Madoff, and we said, Bernie, I'll just describe you as someone who follows the rules. Please check the box that that resonates with you. Do you really think we could trust that Bernie Madoff would have checked? No, he strongly disagrees. He's somebody that wants to break all the rules. No, it's very much the case. He probably would have said strongly agree, and we wouldn't have known anything. He would have been able to come across in these traditional instruments as somebody who was not raising red flags. So I want to move from the traditional into more of what we're about, in a more innovative approach that eliminates the subjectivity and goes for a more objective read. So in doing so, I'm going to give you 3 statements. There's no right or wrong answer, and you can share your feelings in the chat group here, or raise your hand if you want. It doesn't matter to me. There's no right or wrong answer. I want to give you a taste of what I'm talking about before I show you the actual commercial exercise. So take a look at these 3 statements and choose the one that resonates the best with you and your values. Now, I put these together to force you to kind of get into this value one thing over another. kind of mindset. So I wanted to kind of walk before we run. I'm now going to show you a snippet of our commercial exercise. This is literally a piece of our commercial exercise that we ask people to address. And so you see that they're asked to value things in order. Put them in order, rearrange them. I want to see what you consider to be of most value to least value, best to worst, given these statements. The way you see things, the way that you've lived your life. There's no right or wrong answer until we consider some other factors, like what's the job you're being asked to do, as an example. So I just wanted to show you this because I think unless you guys have gone through an axiological instrument like ours in the past, the reaction most of us have, or most people have at this stage, is, Don, that's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. How in the world can you get anything out of that? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the secret sauce. Because you can see that, unless you're a student of our science, you have no idea how to put these things in order to make the employer think you are a certain way. And that is the secret sauce. If I can eliminate the subjectivity, I come out of it with an objective reading about how you assign value to those three dimensions of value. And then I've got an accurate reading. So if I can come away with more accuracy and precision than my predecessors over the last 100 years, I'm in a much better position to actually do something about it. Accuracy matters. I can give you an example. I do have an example that I'm going to include in my presentation today. But just think about it. If you have, think about anything you do at your company. Think about your finance department or your accounting department saying, well, our books this quarter, we just closed the books, and our books for the quarter, they're going to be almost accurate. There's about a 22% error rate. I mean, imagine how ludicrous that would sound, right? It's the same kind of thing. Imagine your IT department saying, well, we were only really concerned with a 74% accuracy rate when we QA'd our software product. I mean, again, it would be ludicrous to hear that. Then why do we settle for that with traditional self-reporting instruments? Because, folks, that's where they are. And many of them even have distortion factor. They even give you, we believe this has got a 17% distortion factor. They put it right there for you to see. That's why there has not been a way to correlate the results of the behavioral instrument test with operating performance metrics. That's the reason why. I mean, how can you correlate? How can you say, well, compare the test results to our turnover rates? Well, how can you do that successfully if you've got a 25% distortion rate or a subjectivity rate or error rate on the scores that you compile? So accuracy really, really matters. And with accuracy, you can now make HR, IT, whoever, a profit center, because you can now equip HR with the same kind of power that other departments have had. And what I mean by that is, if you look at an IT executive, they have all sorts of tools. They've got network management tools that can tell them the health of their network down to the nth degree. You've got CFOs, which have actuarial tables and budgetary tools, which provide specific, really, really specific, accurate data. You've got operational executives that have supply chain management tools that tell them when they have to have something, by when, and where in the supply chain has issues that have to be accounted for with real specificity. The HR executive has had the hardest challenge because their job has to do with managing people, human capital, and they haven't been given tools that allow them to sit at the table with the same level of accuracy. So with this, you can now really take HR into another realm in terms of its contribution. And I'm going to give you an example. We have a client that had been trying about every traditional self-reporting tool known to man, and they were not able to move the needle on involuntary terminations. So this is a company that puts employees around money, and very expensive merchandise. So you can imagine that, you hear the term shrinkage. I mean, it's theft. I mean, you got theft, you got credit card numbers are exposed, you got embezzlement, you got all sorts of things that can go on when you put people around expensive merchandise, money, people's credit card numbers, things like that. So their issue was the expenses related to the turnover associated with involuntary terminations for egregious misconduct. The traditional self-reporting instruments were not doing the trick. So their vision was to implement an accurate way or assessment that could accurately help them understand where risks were, what employed candidates were higher risk, so they could make better decisions about which people to trust to represent their brand. Without getting into too many details, I put some slides together to just kind of make this as clear cut as I can. They gave us basically, we had to allow enough time to pass. So what we administered the 20-minute survey. By the way, if I didn't mention that, it says 20 minutes. We administered the 20-minute survey to everybody in the company, and then we just let time, kind of pass. After a while, we had a database of over 270 involuntary termination records, and we had the corresponding scores. So we detected patterns associated with people who were getting terminated for cause for egregious misconduct. And it made up, I'm showing you one of the patterns, because there's different patterns. Not everybody had the same issue. There were different motivations for doing something untoward. One of the patterns that accounted for over 5% of the involuntary terminations was a rash judgment with a poor outlook on their future and a nonconformist threat, or a nonconformist threat. That made up over 5% of the terminations for cause. We then took that pattern and we compared it to over 11,000 records of people who applied for the job. So we can say, hey, look, I found this in over 5% of the people who are getting terminated for cause. And then we looked at over 11,000 records of people who applied for the same job, and we analyzed how often it was being found in that group. And it was basically 1/3 of 1%. So then you compare that and you go, wait a minute, I've got something that's occurring in over 5% of the people we're getting clobbered with because we're losing training dollars. It's cost to replace these people, in addition to the hard cost of the money or the fraud that occurred. And the pattern they have, their value pattern settings are being found in over 5% of the occurrences, and it's only found in 1/3 of 1% in the general population of people in the same demographic who apply for the job. So I'm actually, I don't mean to give you guys my ice cream headache here. I just wanted to drill down to the lowest level of detail. These are actual scores. So this is the level of detail and precision you can get. These are actual scores of people that were being termed for cause. And so basically what you see is we have a pattern that's occurring 15 times more often in the population that's getting termed involuntarily than the general population, using straight statistical algorithms that you could take to any dean of statistics at any university down the road from where you live. That equates to a 99.99% statistical significance or confidence factor. So, loaded with that information or insight, this employer has warnings now that occur when they have a candidate who poses that level of risk. And with that knowledge, with that insight, they've now reduced their involuntary terminations by almost 70% 4 years in a row. Let me say that again. Involuntary terms are down almost 70% 4 years in a row. So I wanted to give you an example about why accuracy matters. This is something they were never able to do with the traditional means of testing that rely on a subjective approach. Now, I also wanted to show you that application of the value science results has to do more with pre-employment. And the major basis or thrust for my conversation with you today had to do with how do we create really, really good leaders based on where they are with their EQ. So I want to spend really the majority of our time in that area and talking about what we can do with this EQ insight to really build our management team with really, really quality managers that will be good at retention and really inspire people to give their best effort. So I want to focus some of our attention there. Now, in doing so, I want to point out that there's two elements when we talk about, making the best of our leaders. One is in self-management, and the other is relationship management. I'm going to start with self-management, which has to do with a person's personal growth, self-help. Hey, what can I do? What can I do? How can I be more self-aware? How can I be more mindful about my frailties or my vulnerabilities under pressure? What are my tendencies that can get me into trouble? What are my tendencies that can interfere with my success to be the greatest leader the company ever had? Well, that's the self-management aspect. I'm going to start there. And with regard to that, we have 3 management programs that we've been delivering for over 15 years. So in all 3 cases, you'll notice the term personalized over here. I want to really highlight that because that's what makes us different. Most people in HR are very familiar with the concept of having an LMS, and perhaps the LMS has inherent to it a leadership course or a third-party leadership course that was loaded into it. But folks, there are over 60,000 leadership courses on Amazon, or books, excuse me. So obviously that one-size-fits-all approach has not been, the panacea. So we've taken a very different approach, unlike anything in the world. So I'm going to show you some things that are very refreshing about how we can make development more effective. And I'm going to use our management track to make that point. So again, I'm going to focus on the personalized aspect. So our management program involves these 13 topics. Now, we're not going to win an award because our 13 topics are the best topics that have ever been, considered. These are 13 aspects of management that are vital if you want to be a good manager. If you want your company or organization to have good managers, they have to do these things well, or they really won't be good managers. So the aspects or the topics are not what makes us different. What makes us different is we take each topic and we tailor the content to specifically fit the individual's unique EQ scores. So to make my point, I'm going to show you some content that I've copied and pasted from Unit 4, Desire to Help Others Succeed. So literally what I'm showing you is I've got 2 people going through the program, and one of them, person 1, I've obviously taken out the names to respect the confidentiality. I'm literally just taking a little bit of language, as much as I can fit on a slide. I'm showing you, though, that the language, the content, the messaging is different. Because remember, each person's going to have their own dial settings. And each person will have what we call in the business their own blind spots. They're going to be vulnerable in certain areas. Some managers will be vulnerable to not delegating enough and demoralizing their people because they do everything themselves and they don't give them room to grow. Others may be not at their best because they're not giving enough recognition and acknowledgement to their team members. So every manager will have their own vulnerabilities. So when we give them content, we want to give them the content about being a good manager that has a desire and ability to help others succeed, but we want to do it in a way that calls attention to their vulnerabilities. Look, you need to watch out for this. You're different than person 2. I'm not going to talk to person 2 the same way. They're getting a whole different lesson plan from me because person 2 has a different set of challenges based on their EQ scores. So I wanted to show you this with the limited time we have. I wanted to at least give you, whet your appetite and show you that this is a way to really move the needle in terms of self-management. Because if I can be a manager that actually has a leadership program that actually is talking to me in a personalized way and pointing out my own personal challenges that's different from everyone else in management, then I'm more likely to really come away and have that content stick and really make it effective. So I wanted to start with that. And then I want to move to the leadership track. Now that was the management track. And before I do, I just wanted to, the management track, you remember, had the 13 topics. Now, leadership would be for your more seasoned executives or, quite frankly, the people who have been through the management track and now they're ready for leadership. But leadership was just nice. We're assuming you're familiar with the topics. I don't need you to learn about why being an effective communicator is important. We covered that in the manager course. I'm now going to focus 13 units on your personal EQ and making you better at your EQ. And so I'm literally going to be talking to this management or leadership development, trainee personally. And I'm going to be pointing out their strengths, because guess what, folks? Most poor judgments are made because the strength was overemphasized and it became a weakness. And it's because they're focusing too much attention on a thinking orientation that they value, and not enough attention on a thinking orientation they're devaluing or neglecting, ignoring, or altogether, sweeping aside. So this is for the more experienced, or the managers who've been through the manager program, and now it's that continuing that sustained effort, because EQ is not reading a book, going to the Marriott for 2 hours and watching a seminar, listen to Don speak for an hour today. It's a life journey. I mean, it's a journey, and it's all about mindfulness and self-awareness. You guys probably hear the term self-awareness ad nauseum, and it's really important. EQ is something you need to practice, and the way to practice it is to have a program that reminds you about it regularly. So we won't let you forget about it, because if you forget about it, you're going to go right back to making the same mistakes you've been making. So this focuses on the executive's EQ and points out some of the things that can occur if they don't manage their strength profile in a really effective way. And most people are accustomed to the traditional tests that are highlighting strengths, but the importance of EQ is that we're focusing on how the strength can turn into a weakness. And then the other thing I wanted to show you is we also have a program for individual contributors. So you see the 13 topics that we include in this program. So these, I'm just showing you this because if you think about it, this is a scalable software-based approach where you can literally have everybody in your company elevating their EQ. So you can literally have, the rising tide, lifts all boats in the harbor. I mean, you can literally be elevating the EQ, the judgment, the thoughtfulness of everybody in the company, regardless of whether they're a mid-level manager, a manager just getting into the first management job, an individual contributor, or a seasoned executive in the company.
Don, this is Nov again. Just a very quick question. In this current world of hybrid workforce, how does this work in terms of both the educational perspective? Is it effective in a instructor-led, in-person type of training, or is it working on an online situation, self-paced, et cetera, et cetera? What is your recommendation for something like this?
Are you asking about the delivery of the content?
Yeah, the delivery, because it strikes me that in all honesty, if I had enough of an understanding of my EQ and my makeup, if you will, I may want to put myself in a class that are several people like me, if you will. We can compare our strengths and weaknesses and learn from one another. So I'm just wondering, how has this been delivered in the last couple of years and with COVID and such?
Yeah, so it is intended to be personalized. So the content is, going to be delivered in a way that, it's going to be unique content, custom crafted for the recipient. However, a lot of the advice, a lot of the activities, a lot of the tips that are provided in the lessons involve, going out and talking to others, or pinging others who might have a higher value setting with a particular thinking facet. But it is intended, well, at least for the self-management, because we haven't gotten into the relationship management, but at least in the self-management is intended to be delivered, and because it's so custom, it's unique to you, or for that matter, each individual.
Okay, great, thank you.
You bet. And then the last thing I wanted to cover was the relationship management. So this is now getting into, okay, I'm a manager. I have a team. I have a team of direct reports that I'm responsible for. So how can I do a better job at understanding how to manage those relationships effectively or optimally? And most of the time, you think about the ones that are going to be the ones where managers can really benefit would be a new employee. Hey, you got a new employee that starts Friday. Would you like to know what buttons to push and what buttons not to push Friday before you start managing them, or would you like to find out the hard way on your own 6 months later? And then you also have the employees that maybe are just a little bit more of a challenge, you're not having the same success with. And so those would be, I would imagine, the two primary uses. But let me kind of show you how we address this. So if you think about it, all that's required now, self-management, all that's required is the manager completes the 20-minute survey. When we get into a relationship management environment, the manager needs to complete the 20-minute survey and the direct reports need to complete the 20-minute survey. So imagine now that Mary Miller, imagine you all are individual managers and Mary Miller works for you. Well, as long as Mary has completed the survey and you've completed the survey, our software now can look at both and say, hey, I've got some things that I want to point out to you. So first of all, let's start with motivations. And so the motivations that Mary has are as follows. These are the motivations based on her value settings, those dial settings. And you can pick on any, you get a summary of what they are, and if you want, you can drill down and look at some of the particulars, and it even gives you advice and things to do, things to take into account in managing a person like that. If we move to the reminder section, it gives you it points out some reminders about managing a person like Mary. And then again, you can drill down and it gives you some tips on how to manage an individual like that. And then what's really cool about the Enlightened, by the way, this is patented content. So our content in this area was the first of its kind to ever be created. And In Light of You section is the primary area for that. In Light of You is saying, hey, I've looked at you personally, your scores, and I've looked at Mary's, and I see a few things or a handful of things where you might have to adapt in order to make it work for her. And so because it's in light of you, your instinct is going to be to zig, but I got to tell you, I would recommend zagging with Mary. So again, you can open up whatever of those sections you would like, and then and get some insight about how you might need to adapt in order to be the best that you can be with respect to engaging Mary and in the work environment. And then finally, the last section is the sensitive conversation. So important or sensitive conversations, a performance review, a constructive feedback discussion. Just not a bad idea to pop in here and go, you know what, Mary hasn't worked for me very long. I've got something I want to talk to her about that I didn't like in the last work product she produced. Let me go and check in here real quick and see about some tips or advice I might want to take into account or consider before I approach her and have that conversation. So I wanted to show you guys that that would be in that relationship management arena. And so I wanted to leave some time for questions, which I've done, and I just want to end with this. The traditional self-reporting instruments are measuring how people act, and values are how people actually think, and thinking always comes first. That's a real important takeaway from my presentation today, and I just wanted to answer any questions that you guys might have in light of what I've covered today.
Great. So Don, let me speak to the crowd here very quickly, and then let's take a look at there's some questions. But I'll leave the meeting open for a little while. We'll let the shall we say, keep it going a little bit beyond the hour. I know a lot of people have got some commitments and so on, but if that's the case, then we can certainly take some questions. And Don, certainly we know how to get a hold of you, and I'll make sure everybody who both was here and didn't make this session will see the link out on the YouTube channel, and I'll make sure that in that I'll have your contact information. I do have a very quick question to start things, and that is, so what do you see on your horizon for, we always talk about continuous improvement. So I'm curious, where is this headed, if at all, differently or expanding?
Well, one of the things that we're excited about is we're going to be, our platform that we operate on, we're going to be releasing that capability for relationship management callable from any mail application. So if you think about any manager, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, to have access from email to interactively get tips and advice about how to optimally manage any of their direct reports, or for that matter, even work with their boss. If their boss completes the survey, you can have the boss component. And not only that, in the time I had, we also have a team component which says, here's what it's like to manage a group like this in an aggregate format. When they think alike, they think very different. You may want to have more one-on-ones as opposed to group meetings. There's all sorts of things like that too. So I think one thing to make this interactive as possible from a very common environment where people spend a lot of time, which are mail applications. So I see that as a technological thing that's very imminent, and we're excited about. And then I think on the leadership development side, I think about offering the content in a variety of formats. Some people are going to pick. Some people are going back to the office and they're going to say, Don, I really would like to have an audio file that I can listen to. I love listening to stuff on the way to work. I got to be in the car for 45 minutes. I think that kind of thing. I think some people like video. Some people are going to like avatars. Some people like content delivered in short bursts once a day. Some people believe me, I'm telling you from experience. I've talked to a lot of customers, and a lot of people will say, no, I don't want an email every day. Give it to me every 2 weeks and let me read it, and digest it. Because the content that I was showing you, the content's been designed intentionally, each lesson to only take about 10 minutes to read. And then the other thing that we're delivering now is that accountability piece. So what can we do after the lesson content? We've given you advice, we've given you tips. How do we reinforce it? I also think that we're already doing a lot of this, but we're actually following up via email and soon to be text, depending on the customer's choices, for how do you reinforce that? Because again, EQ it requires a sustained effort. That's, if anything, that's what I want to reinforce today, is that this isn't, you won't get to where you want to be with emotional intelligence if you just say, you checked it off a list. You put a check in the box. Oh, we went to a seminar, or we gave every employee a book. It requires a sustained effort. So I think you're going to see accountability, sustained efforts with accountability, different content options. Does that help a little bit?
It helps quite a bit, and I'll say that in this day and age, where I keep seeing business models changing to kind of project-based work with strong but small deliverables, quick time, so on. So I think what you're doing in terms of your process for teams in an aggregate is going to be helpful, because the smart thing is you move people through teams based on their skill sets and their ability to collaborate well. And so a new project manager comes in, a new team, we're going to be working for the next 4 months. Knowing that I've got this in hand at the beginning and perhaps throughout is a very key thing. And I would like to invite you to come back when you've got that portion in place to demonstrate us back how that looks and where the differences. Because I think you're right on track with where the businesses are going to.
Okay, good.
Very cool. Questions from the audience. Let me not dominate the conversation here. Anyone? I don't see anything in chat, so they've been very respectful taking and listening. And of course, now that we've recorded this session, we can use it at all times. I am kind of curious in the perspective then, as you say, kind of this continual help type of thing. So, I'm not going to live this every day, although it should be, but I won't because I got other things that are going to interfere. So this idea that I can reach out and get some help. Are you finding, are there any kind of trending type things that you're running into that seem to be new as a result of what we've done to ourselves over the last couple of years here?
No, not really. I mean, the thing is that I get asked all the time, well, Don, what about the impact of what we've been through the last couple of years? And I just kind of, I look at it this way, it would be, you can find different proportions of EQs in companies based on their industry. Like, for example, I just had a workshop for a company that's in lending service company. So if you think about that, their company is heavily regulated, heavily legislated, and its very underwriting process is very procedural. There's the same sequence of steps that have to be followed. They got algorithms that check the health of a person's credit history. It's very structured. So in that company, would I be more likely to find structured thinkers that rely on conceptual should thinking than I would an advertising agency that has to create things that have never been done. Yeah, of course. But in general, people will have their workforce, and so when you go to a remote working environment, which is what most organizations have done, and many of them are staying with that, and some of them are doing hybrid, and very few are going all the way back the other way. But when you do that, if you really are doing a good job of exercising good EQ in your management team, you're going to make the necessary adjustments and you're going to adapt based on what's needed, right? You're not, because it's not, you can't say, well, this is the way to do it. No, the way to do it is to know on an individual level, to think practically, to compare each employee relative to the other and know what is best for you to accommodate or engage or inspire each individual employee in light of the new surroundings or the environment, the workplace environment, or the atmospheric pressure, or what have you. So I think the thing is that good EQ, it's one of those things that a lot of the managers that are the best in companies, they exercise good EQ, and they're like natural. It's like a person that just naturally, can hit a baseball. It's like they're naturals at it. And a lot of people they were trained well, they were raised well, whatever the case may be, they have really, really balanced settings, and they're the ones in the companies that everybody wants to work for. And the good news for my business is that they're the minority. The majority of people in management are struggling to exercise consistently good emotional intelligence. And so retention rates aren't where they want it to be, in companies, turnover's not where they want it to be, all those kinds of things. So yeah, I would say that, to answer your question, I think the thing that we see is people are looking for like new solutions for hybrid work environments, and we just keep coming back to good EQ will help. They'll come up with solutions. Good EQ managers will adapt. They'll figure out what's necessary to do. If I have to have Zoom meetings with you or go to meetings with my team because I can't meet with them as much, well, that's okay. And the ones that require a lot more acknowledgement and recognition, I need to have more connection with them. I mean, I will adapt if I'm a good manager who really is in touch with I've done a good job of getting to know my team. I will adapt. I'll figure it out. So I guess what I'm kind of saying is that if I can elevate EQ, a lot of these other issues become lesser of an issue.
Yeah, and to that fact, I see a lot of managers saying, well, we lost productivity, we're not in the office. I think our inability to adapt, to your point earlier, adaptiveness is the key to it. Our inability to adapt is so critical right now that we're going to be stuck with some form of this in some fashion, or God knows what else waiting in the wings next year, or 2 years down the road, or 5 years down the road. And I also suspect that you would find that the younger folks coming into the workforce would adopt this kind of thinking faster because it is quantitative, it is calculated, it's measurable, and so on. I think you'll probably find a new generation of leaders who are going to adopt this. Perhaps, your selling abilities can be almost nil. You don't have to, you just post it on a billboard and people will come flocking to it. But I think that the younger generations are going to be much more adaptable, and they've grown up that way, I think.
Yeah, they're. I always like to remind people that we're measuring how people think, not what they think. So what you're going to find is, the younger generation, what they think can be entirely different. I mean, for example, my father had one employer his whole career. He worked for one pharmaceutical company. That just doesn't, the younger generation, in terms of what they think, that's unrealistic. That's, that just doesn't compute.
Nope.
So what they think is different. But at the end of the day, everybody has emotional intelligence. So, we'll be able to tell, how they think. In other words, I can have a person that, regardless of whether or not I know what they think, I can tell how strident they are about their opinions. So, so if I have a younger generation employee, which I do, I have employees that are 2 generations younger than me, and so if I know a lot about their settings, then I know that, hey, you know what, I've got to be a little bit more careful here because they're more vulnerable to be, what's the word is triggered, or to be emotional about something. So it's in my best interest to understand a little bit more about getting to know them and make sure that I don't push the wrong button, those kinds of things. And so it goes to the same thing about productivity in a remote working environment. If I see a person's dial settings and I don't see I don't see a high valuation on personal standards, then the remote working environment could cost me dearly as an employer, because it's showing me that this person really needs a manager to keep pushing and driving them towards the best they can be. So I just think that my advice to everybody is I would much rather know about all the pieces I have on my board, and so I can redirect my management strategy and style, knowing about all the pieces I have on my board. Some people will require much less attention. Some people will require much more attention. Some people are going to be higher maintenance. I've got to, there's just all sorts of things I'd rather know so I can adjust my management time and energy, to make sure that I'm managing my team in an aggregate sense the most optimal way. And so, yeah, it's getting that insight, knowing really what you have, instead of learning the hard way. I mean, it's really painful and expensive when you get somebody to leaves, or if you have to terminate somebody. You've got all that retraining and all that loss training and all that stuff. So I just tell people that think of this: if you could know day one what you need to do to optimally inspire or engage that new employee, why wouldn't you want to know that? Why wouldn't you want to do it that way? It's just the safest way to avoid all the consternation and headaches that can occur, if you don't do it, right? I mean, so yeah, so I'm a big believer that just knowing what you have, and then taking a step back and going, hey, I'm aware now of what I've got reporting to me, and now I really don't have any excuses. If I make the effort now to leverage this insight, I can be a really world-class leader, because I've been given the tools to really understand how to lead these people in an effective way.
I love it. Alrighty. Any other questions? Any comments that you want to leave Don with? Like I say, Don, I'll leave it to you to let me know how things are progressing with this team in the aggregate. I think that would be of great interest to this group as well. Many of us are already leading or working with teams, and just how to make it work for everybody concerned would make a big difference, I think. So.
Yeah, I have to tell you, anybody at all that I'd love to. Coming into this, I didn't know exactly how it might relate to your occupation or your responsibilities or your roles at your organization. Boy, but if anybody could offer some feedback to me about the applicability of what I covered today to your particular role or in your environment, I would, I'm all ears, because I'm always trying to learn how this content relates, so I can adjust. And as a matter of fact, almost every presentation I do is adjusted, and I'm always constantly listening, adapting, listening, adapting. So any comments would be appreciated.
I see you an adaptable person. No, I couldn't resist. No, Don, what I'll do when I send out the link for that, I will ask the question in either the live session or the YouTube version. If they've got comments to give back to you, be very happy to do that and include, like you're saying, your contact info. We'll go from there. Well, okay. Well, I will call it a day. And again, Don, thank you very, very much. Like I say, you presented something very different for us, and I think you did an extremely nice job. Appreciate it. Folks, just a little word up that we've got more vendors in the wings to bring to the table, so keep an eye open for those emails coming through. And Don, stay well. We'll be talking soon. Take care.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.